morning. Thank you for bearing with us with our technical difficulties. My name is Meghan Freed. I'm one of our lawyers here at Freed Marcroft. We're a divorce and family law firm in Hartford, Connecticut. And today I am thrilled to be here for the third time. Well, I'm here for the second time, but Freed Marcroft's here for the third time with Mike and Pat from Marcum. Today we're going to be talking about some common questions that we see on the divorce side and Mike and Pat see on the tax and the investment advisory and financial planning side about what you should be thinking about during divorce to plan for your post-divorce financial future. And a couple of things, because we've had this question in advance. People have asked us, is this webinar to help me only to make the plan during divorce to address after divorce? Or is it okay if my divorce is final and I'm scrambling a little bit to figure out how to make my plan? And we are going to do both of those things. So if you're still in the divorce process, that's great. We have a little bit more leeway to make your plan and get you all set up. If you're after the divorce, don't worry. I'm sure that Pat has seen it 1,000 times, that she's sort of coming in a little bit later than she otherwise might have, and that's fine. She's equipped to handle that, and we'll talk about that today. So you have a sense of who everyone is at the table. I introduced Pat and Mike. I'm going to talk about Mike first over here on the far side of the table. So Mike is a CPA and he's a tax partner at Marcum. He's also a CGMA. That's a Chartered Global Management Accountant. Okay, and what that means is that we're going to be relying on Mike today to do a lot of the work related to how individuals' business impacts their personal finances. So one of the things that's critical here at Freed Marcroft is we have a lot of clients who either they or their spouse are an entrepreneur or a small business owner, or they're a shareholder in a smaller entity. So perhaps a professional entity, a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant, an engineer. So how those businesses impact divorce is critical. So what we try and do, I'm going to use the word holistic so many times today, but our divorce practice is a holistic divorce practice, which is why we want to make sure that we bring conversations with folks like Pat and Mike into our discussions that we're sharing with you today, but also building out our divorce team so that the legal team is one piece of a triad between the financial and tax professionals, the legal team, and the mental health professionals. So Mike's critical because Mike is going to be able to speak to the issues that are created when there is a business entity and how its financial issues impact the taxes of the couple. But the real star of our show today is Pat. So Pat is also a CPA. She's with Marcum and Marcum Wealth Management. Pat's also a PFS. She's a professional financial specialist. And what that designation does is really speak to the core of what Pat's practice is. So Pat works primarily with individuals, and she's a financial planner, but she takes a holistic approach to personal finances so that they're not just focusing on the financial plan itself, but really how it integrates with the investments, taxes, and the strategy. So I said I'd use holistic a lot, and here we go. Holistic. Okay. So we are going to turn it over to Pat, and what Mike and I are going to do is chime in when one of our pieces of the puzzle get triggered. For those of you who like to have a roadmap for the day, I'm a person who likes to have a roadmap. Here's our schedule to be thinking about for our webinar. First, we're going to talk about goal setting and the importance of that. And then Pat's going to turn to where to start, how you assemble your team, how you make a plan. Then she's going to give you a lot of the to-dos, the things that you need to be thinking about. And listen, the professionals are going to guide you through this. So, you'll be supported. But how to address Social Security, beneficiaries, how to take care of your banking accounts, and retitle assets and things like that. So we'll hit on all of those things on a high level. Then we'll talk about using checklists and keeping good records, and we'll have a time for questions and answers at the end as they come up. So if you have a piece of paper, just jot down some of your thoughts, and we'll have plenty of time for Q&A at the end. So with that, let's talk about goals.
Thank you, Megan.
Thanks, Pat.
Well, I think, as Megan said, this is, can be at a very emotional time. It's probably been a very long process, and as you start to get towards the end of that process, maybe the last thing you want to think about is all of this other stuff that has to happen. But it is really not done yet. And it's a time when you really need to reassess everything that's gone on and set new goals for yourself. It doesn't matter which spouse or which partner you are in the marriage. Life is changing. You have to have new goals. They're not going to be the same goals that you had during the marriage. And it's not going to be the same life that you had before. So financially, it's going to be different. It may not be the financial life that you had before. It may be something like 50% of that financial life, because let's face it, 2 households are more expensive to maintain than 1. So, the best practice would be to do this planning prior to the divorce being final, but it's never too late. I just want to say that. It's never too late. We oftentimes don't meet with people for the first time until after the divorce is final, and that's okay. It's just not too late to start, because it's a long life, and small changes over a long period of time can really have a big impact on things. So just remember that, and you have to start somewhere. So let's just talk about, today we're going to talk about financial goals and how to plan for that life, or how to fund your life after the divorce is final. So how do you really, take care of yourself and your family after the divorce is final? And how do you do that? And where's a good place to start? And so I would typically start with what you were spending before the divorce. And so you might do something, just think about what your income sources are, what your expenses are, what you have for assets, what you have for debts. Don't forget income taxes. Mike will talk about that a lot, I'm sure. So you might just want to go through your bank statements and your credit card bills now, before the divorce is final, to just get a handle on where the money comes in from and where it's going.
I'm just going to jump in there. Okay, so a quick tip on a starting place on how to do that. I'm avoiding the word budget, because the word budget usually makes people upset. It doesn't sound fun, but the reality is that you do have a budget because you have a history that you've been living under, and through technology, you can pretty easily get a sense of how much you're spending. For example, on your banking website, you might be able to click over to a tab that'll just show you some historical data. You can use that. Same for your credit card statements. Sometimes it's on the last page. It's not going to be perfect. Sometimes things get categorized by the bank as something that isn't accurate. But you don't have to start with a empty Excel document. I think there are some sheets.
We have templates that we give to our clients that they can start to fill in. They can use it as a guide. They can change it. They can throw it in the trash and start over. Whatever works for you.
Right.
It might be something as simple as a piece of paper where you have 3 columns, dad, mom, and the kids, expenses related to each person. You just have to start somewhere. But looking at your credit card bills and your bank statements is a great place to start.
And what that won't do is do the tax issue that Pat flagged. So in some divorce scenarios, you might have one of the spouses is paying quarterly taxes for the first time. And so that's very different than an automatic payroll deduction where your taxes are sort of taken out of your paycheck above the line, right?
That's right.
So paying quarterly taxes, a quarterly tax payment is a large chunk of money, much larger than weekly or biweekly or even monthly, depending on how you're paid as a W-2 employee. So that's going to be one of the things that you make sure you check in with your team on, okay, what's the quarterly nut and how am I going to make sure I'm factoring that in?
That's right.
And that's a pretty big transition even when you know it's coming.
It is.
Like when you become a partner in an accounting firm, you have to start doing that. And so now I have to do that for myself. And I'm like, wow, this is a giant pain. Like I have to do my budget and figure out cash flows, and now it's not automatically taken out. And
Right.
I know what I'm doing.
Right.
So I was telling my wife, and she's like, holy crap, I'm glad you know what you're doing.
Right.
I wouldn't want to have to deal with this.
Right. And there are a whole bunch of strategies on how to do that too. I'm a lawyer and I'm a partner. I'm a partner in our law firm. And when we started paying quarterly taxes, I was like, okay, we're just going to have to set up another bank account, and I'm going to set up an automatic monthly transfer so that I know that that money is in there. So when you work with a financial team, they can give you all sorts of strategies like that so that it doesn't feel like this looming check 4 times a year.
You also don't want to forget to factor in future expenses down the road when you're creating this plan for yourself. If you have kids at some point, they're going to be driving. And so there's going to be a car, there's going to be car insurance for kids. Maybe there's going to be braces, college, maybe school activities, a wedding down the road. Whatever it is that you think you're going to anticipate paying for kids needs to be factored into this plan, because the plan is not just today's plan. We really want to look at this plan going forward. So we think, budget for things like that, or just think about those things that are going to come about. Don't forget to budget for alimony, whether you're the payor or the recipient, child support payments, and don't forget to factor in what the plan will look like when those payments end at some point in time, because they don't often go forever.
Right. And child support and alimony could end at 2 different times. That's another thing to be mindful.
Right. So we want to figure out what that plan is going to look like at that point in time. Getting a message.
Yeah.
Okay, we're all getting that message.
Cozying up.
Okay.
Thank you.
Don't forget to factor in health insurance. Typically, one spouse has insurance through the other spouse. They can use COBRA and use that for a period of time, but it can be expensive. And at some point, COBRA will end, and one spouse will have to get their own health insurance. So we want to factor in those expenses and what those costs will be.
And that should be something that your divorce team works with your financial team during the divorce, ideally, to make sure we set that up. Get an analysis done of what the best way to do insurance is, balancing the coverages that are contained against the associated costs. So that's everything from whether it's COBRA, whether one spouse is buying health insurance on the open market if they don't work, if we're just going to employer-based, and then also who should carry the kids, and making sure that the kids are getting the best insurance that we can get for them, sort of expanding the family pot so that even though if Pat and I are married, if Pat's carrying the children on her health insurance, we would account for that in sort of how we handled cash flow post-divorce. So it's not that Pat's carrying 100% of the expense of the kids being on her health insurance. She's just, it's her insurance carrier that the kids are covered under.
Right. Oftentimes, one spouse will need to plan a career because, as I said, you're now living on a different amount of income than you had before. So it's very possible one spouse will have to plan a career. So in order to have that career and have some sort of financial income from that career, do you need some training to re-enter the workforce or education? What's that going to cost? How long will it take? And what kind of income could you expect from that career once you have that education and get back in the workforce? So those things would go into the plan. Another thing, and this is a really big emotional one, is consider downsizing the house, a family home. It's an emotional decision, but it's an asset that has a cost to maintain. It usually doesn't produce any income. I think you need to approach it like it's an investment asset, and it's a large part of your wealth oftentimes. So you have to consider diversification like you would with any other part of your investment portfolio. So it may not be the thing you downsize or change on day one, but it might be something that we have to factor into the plan at what point in time. When does it make the most sense to make that change? So we do want to think about that.
Yeah, and even there, the kid's age could have a big impact on that, because if you're trying to shepherd the kids through a difficult time like that, maybe they have 3 years left of high school. You're like, you know what, we can deal with this for 3 years, let them stay in the room and have that level of comfort. But once that ends and they're off to college and they're living somewhere else for 10 months, it matters a little bit less where they're coming home to. And you don't have school districts to worry about and things that are really important for probably why you chose that house in the first place.
Right. And if there is a family home that is being maintained post-divorce, and just to speak to your school district point, Mike, we can as long as we have one parent in the existing school district, it's possible to keep the kids in the same school district if that's a priority for the family. We also have some wonderful stories in our practice about where one or both spouses might have come into the divorce process thinking it was really critical to keep the family home intact. But as they sort of got more adjusted to the idea that their family was transitioning to 2 spaces and got to experience how their kids reacted to it, kids are remarkably flexible as long as they feel secure. And so they actually would do a bit of a 180 and decide, you know what, let's look for 2 smaller homes where everyone can still have bedrooms, but it's just not as much of a burden, financial burden or stressor to carry them. So there's all sorts of ways to do this that your kids will be fine.
Yeah, and I think you just have to be careful as a couple for each spouse to not trade away retirement assets or investment assets just because you have to keep that marital home or that family home. You want to really make sure that the assets that you end up with in the divorce match your cash flow needs. So a house has value, a lot of value for lots of reasons, emotional and otherwise, but it doesn't necessarily produce a cash flow stream that one spouse might need. So you really have to think about what assets you get in the divorce and how they match what you need in terms of funding for that divorce. For example, $50,000 in a taxable brokerage account, it may not necessarily be worth the same as $50,000 in a retirement account because the retirement account can't be touched right now. If one spouse did pull money out of it, depending on their age, there could be some penalties for taking money out of an IRA early. And so I think you just have to factor in what assets there are to divide and what's the best place for them in terms of dividing those assets up.
Right. So often when people go into that, I'm going to attempt to draw for you, so this is going to be painful for everyone. If you think about a divorce as having a whole pie of assets and say, I'm told to move over here. Can you sit that better? Okay. So a divorce has a whole pie of assets. Say, for example, to use really the simplest sort of math, you decided that you were going to divide your assets 50-50. It doesn't mean that you have to divide all of the retirement assets in half, and then the house in half, and then the taxable cash accounts in half. You can take that whole pie and decide, well, we're going to do this one 30-70, we're going to do this one 10-90 because of the different situations of the parties. For example, if one spouse is over the age where making a retirement account withdrawal would be a penalty, it might make sense for that, and cash needs to come out, it might make sense for that spouse to take more of the retirement assets. The point here is really that you have a lot of options on how to divide all of these individual assets. And I think that, this is something that your divorce team works closely with tax professionals and financial professionals on, but it should always be factored in. That said, if you're in the very, very early stages of divorce, what you should be taking away from this is that that's an option, but you don't have to pre-decide what you think you need more. We have plenty of time to make sure we do that right for you.
So that being said, those are kind of the big picture overviews. Where do you start? It seems overwhelming. There's been so much emotion, as I said, as you get towards the end of this process. It's hard to think about all these other things that you have to do. But I would say the first thing you want to do is to build your team. Each spouse is going to need their own team. In the past, you've had a CPA or a financial advisor, and obviously you each have your own attorney. But going forward, you each need those same people on your team. So you want to build that team, an attorney, an accountant, and a financial advisor at a minimum is who you want on that team. You want to keep a copy of your divorce decree because it's going to detail many of these items that have to get completed that we're talking about today. And sometimes it helps. I mean, I'm a checklist person, so I think sometimes it is really good just to have a checklist to help you keep track of these things. And also just, it feels really good when you can cross something off the list,
Has anyone else ever made a list of their to-dos for the day and there's something that you forgot But you've already finished?
Yeah.
And you write it down so
And
you
then
can cross it out?
I have to say I've done that, yeah. So after you've built this team, and this team's going to help you with these things. You don't have to do all these things on your own. So you're going to create this sort of post-divorce budget for yourself. And again, I know no one likes that budget word, but you really need to think about where your income sources are, when they start, and how long they last. And so that's going to be salaries or stock options, rental income, pensions, annuities, alimony, child support, Social Security at some point. You know, all these things come into play, into cash flow. Could be business income from a sole proprietorship or a business. So all of the income sources coming in, you want to create an emergency reserve for yourself. Often, most people say that you should have 6 months of expenses, that amount of money saved up somewhere. Could be a credit card that you have to use temporarily to get you through that,
Or a home
equity line or something, but you want to have access to emergency reserve. Think about how the alimony is going to get paid every month. You can set up a separate bank account if it's going to be automatically transferred into that account each month. So those things have to get set up. You'll be thinking about, again, as Meghan said, what assets each spouse will get in the divorce, and do those assets produce any cash flow or revenue, or do they just have a cost to maintain, like a second home? You know, it's an asset and it has value, but it does have a cost to maintain it. So you need to think about that. What debts need to get paid in the divorce? Are there mortgages, car loans, college loans, credit cards? How do those things get divided up and paid off? If there are joint liabilities in the marriage, then I'm assuming that somebody's name is going to get taken off that joint debt. So you have to figure out a plan to how to make that happen.
Right, and if we can't take both, and if there's a name we can't take off joint debt, we'll do an indemnification on the back end of how to handle it.
Think about, have you guaranteed any liabilities of your spouse? And think about how that's going to be addressed.
Very frequently, these are student loans, maybe from graduate school or doctoral program or something like that, where one spouse co-signed for the other, and so there are implications of that. We can handle it all. It's just we want to take it into consideration.
Just don't want to forget about it.
Right.
And another one could also be guaranteeing a line of credit. A lot of times the bank will require small business owners to sign personally, and then many times they'll require the spouse to also sign, because the bank wants as many people that can pay back that loan as possible.
Right.
So if with kids, it might be a little bit easier to say, yeah, I'll still be on the hook for my kids' doctoral program. But if it's your spouse's business and you're on the line, you're like, oh no, get me off of that thing, because now I have nothing to do with it.
Right, and these are things that sort of during the course of marriage we just sign and don't really
think about.
Right.
Right.
So
when you signed it 8 years ago, everything was hunky-dory, and you're like, yeah, of course, this is great.
Right.
Right.
You might not even particularly remember signing.
Right. So just all those things that you have to, if that has happened, you want to make sure you address that with your team to figure out how you address it during the planning process. Because there are more than one answer to how these things could get fixed. You also want to think about, again, expenses of maintaining your residence. And again, now there's going to be 2 residences, including a mortgage, real estate taxes, insurance, utilities, expenses for the children, their school activities, as I said, cars, braces, college, weddings, and health insurance for each spouse and the children. And think about who's going to be paying for those and how that's going to get funded. At some point in time, and depending on the age of the people who are going through the divorce, you want to think about Social Security. If you haven't already done so, and this is important for any age person, you should go to the Social Security website and get registered if you've not already done so. The website is www.ssa.gov. There's lots of great information on there. You get registered, and then you can get all the information about what you could expect for Social Security benefits when you do begin to collect them. You want to think about, before you remarry, if you were married, if the marriage lasted 10 years or more, you may be eligible to collect benefits based on either the greater of your own earnings record or your ex-spouse's earning records. But if you get remarried, that doesn't necessarily work. So you think about those things before you get remarried after divorce. And again, this future Social Security benefits, you want to factor into that plan as well.
Just also flagging on the Social Security benefits in the 10 years. Some people are concerned that their spouse's eligibility to use their Social Security record will decrease their own benefits. And so I want to clarify that you can use your former spouse's record without diminishing their benefits.
That's right.
Yeah, two separate calculations.
It's just the way your benefits would be calculated. It's based on the earnings record of either your own earnings or your ex-spouse's earnings. But it doesn't diminish what the other spouse gets. That's right.
And a tidbit on the Social Security website, if you're several years away from retirement, don't forget your username. Because it's very, very difficult to get it back. We had a couple of clients call us this year that said, hey, how do I get on the Social Security website? And what's your username? I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry, I can't help you. So even if you're
it's a one-off thing.
If you're 57 and you're like, all right, I'm a few years out, and then it's 3 years later, you're like, man, I can't remember what I use, or the email address doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
So try to keep one of your more permanent email addresses as the forgot password link, something along those lines, so that if you forget, you've got a way to recall it.
Right. Another thing you're going to want to consider doing is updating your will and your estate plan. You're going to execute or revise your documents. Don't forget any trusts you might have. Update your healthcare power of attorney and your general power of attorney. You probably don't want your ex-spouse on there as your power of attorney anymore. If you have trusts, you might need to change beneficiaries or change trustees. So those are all things you're going to think about with your legal team. This is a big one. Change your beneficiary designations on your retirement plans and your life insurance, bank accounts. Lots of times people have what's called a TOD bank account, transfer on death, and they will name their spouse on there. So you want to make sure you just change the beneficiaries and change the names on those accounts. That's very important, because even though your will might say, I leave my retirement assets to so-and-so, you actually have to change them on the plan documents itself. It's very, very important.
Right. Also true with insurance. And just a practical tip that we share with our clients here at Freed Marcroft, often your agreement will, now Pat and Mike are married. We're all going to be intermarried. So Pat and Mike are married, and they had two joint accounts while they were married. And Mike is keeping one and Pat's keeping the other. A lot of times, for some legal reasons, your divorce agreement will contain a provision that you both agree to remove each other from these joint accounts by 30 days following the divorce, or some period of time. As a practical matter, a lot of banks make it pretty difficult to convert a joint account into an individual account. So the mechanism that it might take for Mike to remove Pat and Pat to remove Mike is by really just closing the joint account and opening a new individual account. So one of the things that we really focus on working with our clients, we're not done the day that the divorce is technically legally final. There are all of these things that Pat was talking about that you have to really do after to sort of fulfill the agreements that you made in the agreement and really get yourself set up for your life. But as a practical tip, you're probably going to have a new bank account number. So for those of you that use a lot of auto payments and things like that for bills or repeating payments on credit cards or debit cards rather, that can be a little bit of an annoyance because you're probably going to wind up with a new bank account number.
Right.
But I like to manage that expectation because people think it's going to be easier than it sometimes turns out being.
Right. All of these things don't sound like they're big, but
Right.
they all take a little bit of time. So
They do.
the earlier you can start this planning process, the better off it is.
Right.
And kind of just chip away at that list that we talked about. So changing those beneficiary designations is really important. You have to retitle assets as well.
Right.
So if there's a family home and there's a residence and one person's supposed to come off the title of that residence and there's a mortgage on it, it's very possible you're going to have to refinance that mortgage to get an ex-spouse's name off of that. So that
We could do a
takes
whole
time.
webinar on
Yeah.
refinancing. It'll be 4 hours.
There could be rental properties or other properties or businesses, cars, who's going to own the car? Whose name are the cars in? So all these assets need to get retitled and updated. If there are assets being transferred, like part of a brokerage account or retirement plan, then accounts will need to be set up in the receiving spouse's name in order to receive those assets. And you want a system to track those assets as they come into those accounts too. So lots of different pieces there. And again, it sounds overwhelming, but that's what your team is there for. We're here to help you work through that.
You have to create the checklist and then help you tick off the boxes on it.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. And just, walk you through the steps. For insurance policies, you want to make sure you have insurance on the assets that you own. Change the beneficiaries on the policies. I'll mention that again. Do you need life insurance, disability insurance, long-term care insurance, or an umbrella policy? All those things need to be looked at. If you are insuring valuables or collectibles on your homeowner's policy, you want to make sure that you're insuring the assets that you end up with after the divorce. You don't want to be paying for valuables that are not in your ownership anymore. People forget about those little things.
Those are the extra riders that you pay for.
Some jewelry or artwork or something like that. So you just want to make sure that you're not paying for things you don't own and that you are insuring things that you do own. We talked a little bit about banking accounts. You want to open those bank accounts in your own name and close those joint accounts. You want to get a credit card in your own name. Perhaps you want to do that before you cancel a joint credit card, just so that you can have that card open. You want to check your credit card score, check your credit score. If you have a safety deposit box, you want to get the assets out of that box and open a new one. And here's another one I think people forget about: changing pins and passwords on the accounts and limiting access going forward.
Right.
It's really important. You can tell from the silence.
Right. The heart's really high.
So pins and passwords on accounts limit access going forward. If you're changing your name, you need to update that on your legal records, your passport, your social security, driver's license.
So we have some great client stories about how they changed their names. So in Connecticut, as part of your divorce action, the judge has the authority to grant you the name change right then and there. So you don't have to go to probate court or anything to do it separately, go through a separate name change process. But the updating of the things takes some labor. And I had one wonderful client who told me about how the day after her divorce, she took herself out, I think to Max downtown, sat in a booth in the bar, got herself a glass of wine, and just dialed all of those 800 numbers on the backs of her credit cards to change the name. So, yeah. So some credit cards will require a copy of the divorce decree. Others, it's much more simple. You just tell them that it happened as part of the divorce, and you get a new card. Again, probably with a different number, but.
If one spouse keeps a household computer, the other spouse might want to remove all their personal info from that computer. Again, I know everybody's supposed to have these passwords and things kept private, but usually they're somewhere saved on a Word document on your computer or taped to the front of it.
Probably called passwords.
Right, called passwords. So you want to get that stuff off the computer. Update your billing and your name info with your utility companies, and I guess, really set up a filing system for yourself and keep good records to show that you did all these things that were required of you in the divorce decree, and just so that you can keep track of all the things that you've got going on.
And I just want to share that to the extent that this sounds a little bit overwhelming, it is much less so in actuality, because it is going to be handed to you by the team, right? It's going to be organized. This is going to happen ideally over the course of a divorce and then afterwards, not all at once. So what we're doing here today is telling you how much there are and flagging the kind of things to be thinking about. But truly, our goal as your team is to get you all the way to the airport, not sort of leave you on the access road. So we'll make sure that we make this less overwhelming for you when you're actually going through the process.
Your list will be very specific and tailored to your situation. This is kind of everything that we've seen happen.
That's right.
And I haven't seen one person that has had all of this yet.
No, right.
One person probably does,
right.
but I haven't met him or her yet.
Right.
Another thing you want to think about now that life is different is your tax planning and your income taxes. And, depending on when the divorce is finalized, the tax rules are changing with respect to whether alimony is taxable by the recipient and deductible by the payor. And we've had some webinars in the past already on that, but that rule is changing as of January 1st of 2019. So depending on when this divorce is finalized, your alimony may or may not be taxable as you receive it or deductible when you pay it. So, but either way, it counts as earned income for the purpose of the person who receives it, and that person's eligible to make an IRA contribution on that. So again, we're always encouraging people to save. So you do have that ability, even if you don't yet have earned income from a career or a job. Your filing status for tax purposes is determined on the last day of the tax year. So on December 31st, if you're still married, then your filing status for tax purposes will be either married filing joint or married filing separate. And if you're divorced on the last day of the year, then it's either going to be single or head of household. So all things to think about. Things about if there are children involved, college age, and there's education being paid for, who's going to get the education credits for the college tuition. Oftentimes, I've seen this many times in divorce situations, there are carry forward items from a prior year return when you file jointly with your spouse, like for passive activities or capital losses or charitable contribution carry forwards, and then post-divorce, how are those going to be divided and split up? And then even if the divorce occurs mid-year and there was a family home and there's mortgage interest and real estate taxes, how is that going to get divvied up prior to the divorce? So another thing I think is important to get copies of your prior year's tax returns that you filed jointly with your spouse, just so that you have those for your records.
And typically those will be part of the standard discovery process in the divorce, at least in Connecticut. So tax returns, a few years of tax returns will be available, so we can make that convenient for you.
A couple items on the tax planning. A lot of times, because divorce is a long process, on December 31st, the process is still usually ongoing. And then the two spouses are talking and they're saying, well, I'm definitely not filing with you anymore, or I don't care, and what does it work out better? We have the ability to do a married filing joint versus married filing separate comparison. So if it's in the financial interest where you're going to get $2,000 of less tax by filing joint, sometimes that will push each of the spouses to say, all right, I'll do one more tax return with you. And sometimes it won't, because some are very contentious and people are like, nope, I'm not doing anything with him or her, and that's it, and it's worth $2,000 of my dollars. And we don't make that choice. We just provide you with the information, so you can, because every situation is unique.
Make a decision. Right.
And then on the tax law change for alimony, I just wanted to clarify that any alimony that is already in existence is grandfathered in. So if you already have an agreement, the alimony is still deductible by the payor and includable in income by the recipient. It's going forward. Any alimony that is beginning to be paid starting in 2019 does not follow that rule. It's not income to anybody. It's not a deduction for anybody. So the payor will end up paying tax on that alimony versus the recipient.
Right. So the key is just when your divorce was finalized. If your divorce was finalized prior to January 1, 2019,
that's right,
deductible and includable. If it was finalized after January 1, 2019, then it's sort of what we consider tax neutral, but it means that we're paying income taxes at the higher rate on it.
And then I guess, the next big piece would be to review your financial plan with your financial advisor. Again, it's not just the plan, but oftentimes one spouse will have some investments that they now receive that they haven't been dealing with in the past, and they're not really quite sure what to do with it or what it means, which pieces are taxable, which pieces aren't. What does it mean to have these different accounts? How do I open them? What do I do with them? So, and then, the big thing that everybody asks, whether they're married or divorced or what their situation is, they want to make sure that they have enough money. How long is it going to last? Do I have enough? What changes do I have to make in my life to make this get me from now to the end of my life, and to leave something for my kids or leave something to charity or whatever it's going to be? Another big one, can I afford to retire? When can I afford to retire? So, you know, we need to gather all those assets together. We need to look at your asset allocation, figure out what's appropriate for you. Is it the right asset mix to meet your income and your goals? We have to watch your cash flow and figure out what changes you need to make. And again, we need to think about the tax implications of those pieces as well. I've seen it where people have not realized that taking money out of a retirement account before age 59 and a half incurs not just income tax, but a penalty. So we want to think about, if you need to fund something, where's that asset going to come from? Where's the money going to come from to take care of those things?
Right. And I know we have a question about this anyway, so I'm going to skip a little bit ahead to the question section and talk about quadros.
Yeah.
One of the things that you might hear about during the course of your divorce is that in a quadro, well, you might hear the expression quadro and not know what the heck that means. That's QRDO. It's an acronym for a Qualified Domestic Relations Order. Basically, it means that we can transfer certain qualified funds via a motion to the court as part of a divorce without having any penalty. So, structured into your divorce, if money is moving, now I'm going to marry you again. Okay. All right. So Pat and I are married.
Been married and divorced.
I know. It's just really it's dynamic morning. So if Pat and I are married and Pat has $1 million in retirement assets and I only have a couple thousands because I was a stay-at-home parent, and Pat is moving some of her retirement funds over to me from her 401k, for example, we're going to do that via a motion to the court, and that itself is not going to trigger a penalty or anything like that. That's taken into consideration. We can make sure that happens.
There's no earned income taxes for that. There's no
Correct.
10% penalty. It's one of the very few ways that under the age of 59 and a half, you can take retirement assets out of one account and put them anywhere else. In this case, it's in another retirement account for someone else. It's a way to split them up without any kind of tax implication.
Right. So don't, as you're thinking about how to deal with my pie chart. Yeah, right. Elegant. You don't have to worry about retirement moving from one person to another. There are mechanisms to do that.
Yeah. So I think just to kind of wrap up in summaries, you want to reassess your goals, reassess everything really. Put your team together, make a plan, review it often, especially in the beginning. Use checklists, keep good records, ask questions. There are no dumb questions. Be your own advocate, and just know that we're all here to help you. We're here for your team.
That's right. All right. So are we ready for some questions? Even though I pre-answered quadros, and Laura's been writing down as questions have come in. Let's see. Oh, okay. Yeah. Can we both keep the same financial professionals post-divorce? It's a great question. I'm actually going to leave it to the financial professionals to answer the question about financial professionals post-divorce.
Yeah, so you can, because as accountants, financial advisors, we have an obligation to our clients individually. So if you two are married and you both use me as your accountant, I can still be an accountant for both of you, and I can't tell you anything about Pat or you anything about Meghan. So you can. However, if I had a relationship with Meghan first and we've known each other a long time, and Pat really doesn't know me all that well, she may want to go create her own team. So the answer is yes, you can. You don't have to. It's really up to you. So if you're very comfortable and you both have relationships with the financial advisors and CPAs that you have, yes, you can keep that. But you can also start all over.
That's right. And I think that in some ways, if you do go in a different direction, I'm going to talk about more about the tax piece, right? So say we're in that gap Mike was talking about earlier, where folks are trying to decide. You didn't finalize your divorce prior to the year end, and you're trying to decide, okay, are we going to do married filing jointly, or are we going to do singly? How are we going to handle that? Coordination between the two tax professionals could be helpful in that respect, so that everyone knows what's going on and is on the same page. And one flag for mediation and collaborative, the less litigious approaches to divorce is this is all sort of built into that process, so everything's coordinated, regardless of people. You'll have members of your collaborative team, for example, that are neutrals, and you'll have have your own advisors as well on the side.
Right, so whether you have the same tax professional or I can talk to another tax professional. Let's say Laura is also a CPA.
Yeah.
So if I kind of coordinate with the other CPA for child tax credits, different things that phase out for income levels, it could end up helping the overall family keep more of the money that they made by either having it in one house or by having two professionals who can talk to each other about that.
Perfect. Right. Either way that it's coordinated. All right. Let's see. We have a lot. Okay. This is a great question. Would you recommend using a form letter that would include a copy of the divorce decree to all the creditors needing accounts closed and or name changes? The idea being individual account numbers could be added. Okay, so I think what we're saying here is, could we come up with one letter that goes to everyone and you just sort of put in your individual account number and the name of the financial institution so that it's easy, and attach a copy of the decree. I have an opinion that is not the answer, it's just an opinion. I would, for me, I think that the fewer people that get your decree, the better, right? So if someone requires it, fine. But I feel as though for me, I would just, I wouldn't, I don't really provide more information than is required. So I would sit down and call everyone and find out what they require. You might be able to make the change right there on the phone. And if not, if it makes sense to do something in writing, I would actually get the fax number, or I know I sound like I'm speaking from another generation, but I do people.
You mean e-fax?
Yeah, right. Or the email address or the e-fax number that you have to send the documents into. So there's going to be a bit of information gathering in order to do that. By the way, there are people that you can hire to help you gather that information if you're short on time and would like some help. But if you get the list, then you can narrow it down to how people require, what information people require to make the change, how they require receiving that information, and go from there. So that would be my opinion. But
no, I agree. I think you don't want to just broadcast it out.
Yeah, right.
Right, because there's no confidentiality agreement when the person at the credit card company has that divorce decree.
Right.
It's, a third-year person who just graduated college is sitting there and doesn't even know that it might matter to you.
Right.
They don't have that same level of importance to that document as it does to you. So they might not handle it with the same level of care. And you don't know that. He or she may, but you don't know. So keep it closer to the vest, and it's your information.
Yeah. So I think just whenever you can get away with less, get away with less. Mm-hmm. Did we have another? Yeah, we have. Great. Oh, can you take money from a 401k to pay for legal fees, and are there penalties? That's a really good question.
They're looking at me like I should know the answer.
I know pieces of the answer, but I want you to give it.
You can always take money from your 401k. The question is, what does it do? So when you take it out before you're 59 and a half, it's income. So you take out $10,000, you're adding $10,000 on your taxable income. So if you're in a 22% bracket, it's going to cost you $2,200 right at the top. So you've only got $1,700 left. On top of that, there's a 10% penalty if you're under 59 and a half. So now you got another $1,000 in penalty. Now you've only got $6,800. So you took out 10 and you're only left with $6,800. It's not a really great return. So we'd recommend trying to find the money somewhere else. If there are enough assets that are being divided, some of those should be able to give you current cash to help pay for those legal fees associated with the divorce.
So you might be able to borrow from your 401k.
Right. I think the key is the loan. Yeah. The point Mike is making is that a 401k early withdrawal can be really, it's essentially expensive money, right? It's just, it's money that costs a lot to access. But we do find that, and this depends on your individual plan administrator, but 401k loans for legal fees, or really any other sort of cost associated with divorce, that can be a less expensive way to access those funds if you're someone who has a heavy percentage of your savings or in qualified accounts.
Yeah, and then you would be basically through payroll deduction paying back that loan.
That's right.
Every time you got paid.
Repaying yourself.
And you paying interest yourself.
Right.
So that would be a better option than taking a distribution.
Right. Not always available, but when it is available, that's a more prudent, financially prudent option than taking an early withdrawal.
So that's how we set the tax question up with a financial advisor.
Yeah.
And how your
That's
team
right.
helps you get with your best cash flow.
That's right.
That's right.
That's right.
And a related question to that. So there in Connecticut and in many states, is my understanding, there are certain automatic orders that are in place when someone files for divorce, and it makes sense. You will, when you read them in your own divorce, you'll understand why they're in place. It's basically no one can diminish the household assets in a way that is at odds with how they normally spend. But there's exceptions to that made, and one of the exceptions is reasonable attorney's fees. So, for example, say you did have a home equity line, and you had some retainers to pay to you and your spouse's counsel that might come out of the home equity line as opposed to out of a 401k, and that would be appropriate because it's a reasonable fee associated with the divorce. And I can hear Laura scribbling. Oh, and we have another one. Okay. Oh, we had a comment on Roth IRAs can be helpful. Yeah, so whether or not you do a Roth IRA or a Roth 401k, whatever makes sense for you, that is a really great question for the team. Highly personal to your tax situation.
Right. If you have an after-tax Roth IRA, you can take out the money that you've put into it penalty-free. And if it's been there 5 years. If you're over 59 and a half, you can take it whenever you want. But if you put it in when you were 23 and now you're 30, you can pull out what you've put in with no penalty whatsoever. There's not an age restriction because it's already your after-tax money that you put in.
Your principal contributions.
Yeah.
So not the interest, but those, I think I remember when I was a young person with a Roth, I think my annual contribution was limited to $2,000. I think that's what it was way back when. And so those 2,000s that you did once a year when you were young professionals starting out that have been in your Roth might be available now to you. And that's an astute comment. That's a really nice resource of money where the withdrawals are much more flexible on the Roth. But
if your employer has a Roth 401k option, you might have more money there. If you've been contributing to your Roth over time, you might have some money in there. But there are income restrictions on when you can contribute too. So it's not everybody has access to be able to contribute to one.
Right.
But if you have one, yeah.
1 year plus in divorce proceedings, spouse isn't paying household expenses for marital run and the divorce isn't finalized. Okay, so I think this is a divorce that's taking a while. So the person who wrote in is over the 365 days, which it does happen. Less common, but the contribution to household income can be taken care of depending on your divorce process. If you're mediating or in a collaborative, you can reach agreements among your team on how to address that. If you're in a litigated divorce, one of the things that usually happens is the two lawyers can talk lawyer to lawyer to figure out how to address that. The divorce is taking longer than we thought. We need to turn on some contribution to household expenses or some alimony, however makes sense in your instance to get that categorized. But absent an agreement, in our firm we try and reach an agreement if we can, because that's less expensive and can be, just a faster way to get things done. But you can always ask the court to assist. So you can go to court in Connecticut on a motion for contribution to household expenses and try and get some cash flow turned on that way. So there are ways to address that when you thought your divorce was going to last X long, and it's lasting longer. Incidentally, our average divorce right now at my firm, Marcroft, is actually running up under 180 days. So that the scenario of a year plus isn't the case for everyone. Early withdrawal penalty on the Roth pre 59 and a half. You guys want to circle back to just that principle?
Is there an early withdrawal
I
penalty?
think that's a question, yeah.
If your money has been in your account for 5 years, there is not one. If you're only pulling out the money you put in. So in Megan's example, she put $1,000 in each year from when she was 23 to 30. She has $8,000 in there. So
And she's not 31. She's cleared the 5 years.
right. So she's 30 now. It's been 5 years since her first contribution. She could take out the contributions that are 5 years old. So the 23-year-old, the 24, and the 25-year-old contributions, she can pull that $3,000 out completely tax-free, penalty-free. She's good on that.
That's right. You're not subject to the 10% IRS withdrawal penalty.
And when you pull money out of the Roth it's not income because you've already paid tax on it. You paid tax on it when you were 23, when you were 24, and when you were 25. That's why the IRS allows it to grow tax-free because you pay the tax up front.
Great. Thanks. All right. Are we good? All right. I think we are through all of our questions. I just want to thank you for a really engaging and energetic chat today during this webinar. It was great. We didn't have Roths on our list, but I love that got brought up by the audience and we got to talk about that because for many people that can be a resource they really didn't know that they had that might be available to get some cash out without any particular, it's post-tax and without penalty. So that's great. We are all here and available to any of you that have questions. A summary email will go out following this webinar and our contact information will be included on it. So feel free to write to any of us. We're all available and thank you for your time today. We are coming in at just under an hour, so we appreciate that. And we really hope that this was informative and helpful to you. Again, if any parts of it felt overwhelming, that's why there's the team. This was an issue spotting exercise, but they're building the teams together. The team will serve as the guide throughout the process. So again, on behalf of me, Meghan Freed, and our legal team at Freed Marcroft, and Pat and Mike and their tax and financial advisor team at Marcum, we're grateful that you joined us and hope that if you have any questions, you'll feel free to shoot us a note or give us a call.